Formula One is exploding behind closed doors right now. Because multiple F1 teams have reportedly turned against Mercedes after the FIA launched a deeper investigation into the engine linked to Antonelli's terrifying early-season dominance. And according to insiders inside the paddock, this is no longer normal Formula One politics. This is a revolt. Ferrari is furious. Honda wants urgent action. Audi reportedly believes Mercedes crossed a line the sport cannot ignore anymore. And the reason is absolutely insane. Rival engineers now believe the Mercedes engine may have been changing behavior after FIA inspections were already completed. Not through illegal software. Not through hidden electronics. Through heat. Tiny thermal expansion inside the engine itself that allegedly transformed the power unit once Antonelli hit the track. That sounds impossible. Until you realize the estimated advantage may have reached nearly 4/10 per lap. In Formula One, that is catastrophic for the competition. That is the difference between fighting for podiums and making the entire grid look slow. And now the FIA is investigating aggressively. Because according to reports, Mercedes allegedly discovered a loophole built around one microscopic detail hidden inside the regulations. The engine was only measured while cold. So rival teams believe Mercedes designed components that physically changed once the engine reached full racing temperatures. Special alloys. Microscopic deformation. A hidden combustion effect. An engine that may have looked legal in the garage, but behaved completely differently during the race itself. And this is where the story becomes explosive. Because the FIA originally cleared the system. Mercedes passed inspections. Everything looked legal on paper. But after Miami, pressure from Ferrari, Honda, and Audi reportedly became so intense that the FIA prepared new hot condition verification procedures specifically targeting the Mercedes power unit. Now the entire paddock is waiting for one moment. Monaco. Because if Mercedes suddenly loses pace after the new inspections begin, Formula One may witness one of the biggest technical scandals of the modern era. But if Antonelli stays dominant anyway, then the rest of the grid may have an even bigger nightmare on their hands. Because that would mean Mercedes did not just build the smartest loophole in Formula One. They built the fastest car too. If you love Formula One stories that expose what is really happening behind the garages, subscribe to the channel. At the beginning of the season, most teams thought Mercedes had simply built a strong engine. Nothing unusual. Formula One always goes through cycles where one manufacturer finds a small advantage before everybody else catches up. Sometimes it is aerodynamics. Sometimes tire management. Sometimes energy recovery systems. But after the opening races, engineers across the paddock started noticing something they could not explain. The Mercedes power unit did not behave like a normal engine anymore. And honestly, that is where the paranoia inside Formula One exploded. Because telemetry data from Australia, China, and Japan reportedly showed Antonelli gaining acceleration in phases where rival power units had already reached their normal delivery limits. That sounds technical, but imagine two sprinters leaving the starting blocks at the exact same speed. Then halfway through the sprint, one suddenly finds another burst of energy nobody else has. That was the Mercedes. And rival engineers became obsessed with understanding why. At first, some blamed the new W17 chassis. Others believed Mercedes had perfected their energy recovery deployment. But then something very strange happened. The hotter the races became, the stronger the Mercedes looked. That detail immediately triggered suspicion inside rival garages. Because normally, Formula One engines become harder to manage as temperatures rise. Heat creates instability. Components expand. Efficiency usually drops slightly under extreme stress. Mercedes appeared to do the opposite. And according to multiple reports, that observation pushed Ferrari, Honda, and Audi into formally pressuring the FIA for deeper investigation. Not because they had proof of outright cheating. Because they believed Mercedes had discovered something hidden deep inside the wording of the regulations. And eventually, engineers focused on one tiny rule almost nobody cared about at the beginning of the season. The FIA only measured engine compression while cold. That detail changed everything. Because Formula One engines physically change shape once temperatures rise during races. Metal expands. Pressure increases. Microscopic movement happens constantly inside the combustion chamber. Normally, teams try to minimize those effects. Mercedes allegedly designed their engine to exploit them instead. That is what triggered panic across the paddock. Because according to technical reports, Mercedes may have created an engine that behaved one way during FIA inspections, and another way entirely once Antonelli was pushing flat out on track. One theory suggested the team used a special connecting rod alloy designed to expand slightly under extreme heat, allowing the piston to travel higher inside the cylinder during race conditions. Another claimed the cylinder head itself subtly deformed inward once temperatures increased. Tiny changes. Almost invisible. But Formula One operates at microscopic levels. A few millimeters can decide championships. And then came the theory that truly terrified rival manufacturers. The hidden secondary combustion chamber. According to reports, Mercedes may have designed a tiny extra cavity inside the engine that helped the power unit remain legal during FIA checks while cold, before effectively sealing itself off once temperatures rose during races. If true, the implications are enormous. Because the engine could potentially operate far more aggressively on track than during inspection procedures. And according to technical estimates, the total gain may have reached nearly 4/10 per lap. That number terrified the entire grid. 4/10 changes everything in Formula One. Qualifying strategy, tire wear, overtaking opportunities, driver confidence. And suddenly, Antonelli became the center of the biggest technical controversy of the season. Not because people doubted his talent. Actually, the opposite. The rookie looked so naturally comfortable inside the W17 that rival teams started questioning whether the engine itself was helping stabilize the car under acceleration. Smoother exits. More predictable traction. Better drivability. And this is where the FIA investigation reportedly became much more aggressive after Miami. After Miami, the situation inside Formula One reportedly became far more aggressive than the public realized. Because by that point, rival teams were no longer treating the Mercedes engine as a clever gray area innovation. They were treating it like a direct threat to the entire championship. And this is where the revolt inside the paddock truly began. At first, Ferrari, Honda, and Audi had pushed for clarification quietly. Normal political pressure. Private discussions with the FIA. Technical questions behind closed doors. But after Antonelli continued showing extraordinary pace even after Mercedes lost one earlier power deployment system, frustration reportedly exploded. Because the car was still terrifyingly fast. That detail changed everything. Rival engineers started believing the controversial electrical deployment system had never been the real source of Mercedes' dominance at all. The real advantage still appeared to be hidden deep inside the engine itself. And according to reports from inside the paddock, telemetry comparisons after Miami made rival manufacturers even more suspicious. Especially under acceleration. Especially during long runs. Especially once engine temperatures stabilized deep into race conditions. That is what triggered the FIA's deeper investigation. Because Formula One engineers can usually explain performance gains logically. Better aerodynamics. Lower drag. Superior traction. There is almost always a visible reason. But the Mercedes acceleration characteristics reportedly looked different. Too stable. Too efficient. Too consistent once the engine reached full operating temperatures. And honestly, that consistency terrified rival teams more than outright speed itself. Because smooth performance creates confidence. And confidence creates domination. If a driver trusts the car completely on corner exit, lap time appears naturally everywhere across the circuit. And Antonelli looked completely fearless inside the W17. That is extremely unusual for a rookie. Especially under brand new regulations. Most young drivers struggle with unpredictability. Tire overheating. Energy deployment balance. Rear instability under acceleration. Antonelli looked calm almost immediately. Which is why rival engineers started questioning whether the engine itself was making the car easier to drive at the limit. Not just faster. More stable. That possibility changed the entire emotional tone of the controversy. Because suddenly, this was no longer only about raw horsepower. It became about drivability. And drivability changes championships. Imagine trying to sprint across ice. If the surface feels unstable, you hesitate. But if the surface suddenly gives perfect grip, confidence explodes instantly. That may be what rival teams feared Mercedes had created through the alleged thermal engine behavior. And now the FIA appears determined to investigate exactly that possibility. Reports indicate new hot condition verification procedures are specifically designed to examine whether the Mercedes engine behaves differently once fully heated during racing conditions. That sounds like a simple technical adjustment. It is not. It could completely expose whether the engine transformed after passing inspections. And suddenly, Monaco becomes more than just another Grand Prix. It becomes a pressure test for the entire Mercedes project. Because everybody inside Formula One understands what happens next. If Mercedes suddenly loses several tenths after the FIA changes arrive, the entire paddock will connect the dots instantly. The accusations will intensify. The criticism surrounding Antonelli's performances will explode. And the narrative around Mercedes' early season dominance could change permanently overnight. But here is the detail making rival teams nervous. Some engineers reportedly still believe the W17 remains the strongest overall package on the grid even underneath all the controversy. That is the nightmare scenario for Ferrari, Honda, and Audi. Because if the FIA tightens inspections, if the loophole effectively disappears, if Antonelli still dominates afterward, then Formula One may be forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Mercedes did not just exploit the regulations better than everyone else. They may have simply built a better car from the very beginning. And now Formula One is approaching the moment that could expose everything. Because the deeper this investigation goes, the more dangerous the situation becomes for Mercedes politically, technically, and emotionally. At first, the controversy was mostly hidden inside engineering circles. Fans heard rumors. Teams whispered behind closed doors. But now the entire paddock is watching every single Mercedes lap like a courtroom investigation. And honestly, Mercedes knows exactly what is at stake. Because if the FIA investigation successfully proves the engine behaved differently once heated during races, the damage goes far beyond one loophole. It changes how people remember the opening phase of the 2026 season forever. Every Antonelli pole position gets questioned. Every dominant qualifying lap gets re-examined. Every explosive acceleration zone becomes evidence in the eyes of rival teams. And that creates enormous pressure inside Mercedes right now. Not panic. Pressure. Because Formula One teams can survive technical controversies. What becomes dangerous is losing control of the narrative. And according to reports from inside the paddock, Mercedes may already feel that happening. Ferrari reportedly believes the FIA reacted too slowly. Honda pushed aggressively for deeper inspections after Miami. Audi wanted immediate technical clarification before other manufacturers started copying the concept themselves. That last part matters more than most fans realize. Because Formula One teams only revolt this aggressively when they fear somebody else discovered an advantage they cannot replicate quickly enough. And Mercedes allegedly forced the entire grid into exactly that situation. One team finds the loophole. Everybody else realizes too late. The championship balance shifts instantly. That is why the political atmosphere now feels explosive. Because rival manufacturers are no longer only fighting Mercedes on track. They are fighting to stop the idea from spreading. And this is where the Monaco weekend suddenly becomes one of the most important technical moments of the modern Formula One era. Because once the FIA begins fully applying hot condition verification procedures, the Mercedes engine loses the one protection it allegedly depended on. Cold inspections. That changes everything. Imagine somebody preparing for a security check that always happens before sunrise, then suddenly being told the next inspection will happen under bright daylight instead. Every hidden detail becomes harder to control. That is effectively what Mercedes now faces. And inside the team, the emotional pressure may become enormous for Antonelli specifically. Because the rookie is no longer only racing against Max Verstappen, Ferrari, or McLaren. He is racing against expectation itself. Every qualifying session after Monaco becomes a public test. Every tenth of a second matters. If Antonelli suddenly loses pace, critics will immediately claim the engine trick created the dominance. But if he stays fast, then the entire Formula One grid may face an even more uncomfortable reality. The rookie might actually be that good. And honestly, that possibility terrifies rival teams too. Because hidden underneath all the engine controversy, there is still a very uncomfortable detail nobody inside the paddock can ignore. Mercedes may still have the best overall car anyway. That is why some engineers reportedly remain deeply nervous even after the FIA intervention. Because loopholes can be closed. A genuinely superior car is much harder to stop. And if Monaco arrives, if the FIA tightens inspections, if the thermal advantage disappears, and Antonelli still delivers pole positions, then Formula One may witness something even more dramatic than a technical scandal. The birth of a new Mercedes era the rest of the grid failed to stop in time.